Welcome to In Conversation. I'm your host, John Rees. Today I'm talking to Moazzam Begg, whose time as a prisoner in Guantánamo Bay might well have shattered most people. Yet he remains an unwavering voice in the global conversation on justice, accountability and human rights. Born in Birmingham to Pakistani parents, Moazzam's journey has taken him from the streets of Spark Hill to the heart of some of the most turbulent events in our time. In 2002, he was illegally seized by Pakistani intelligence against the backdrop of the 9/11 attacks on America and the so-called War on Terror. He was taken into US custody, beginning nearly 3 years of imprisonment in the Bagram Air Base and Guantanamo Bay. Much of it in solitary confinement and all of it without any charge. Since his release, Moazzam has become one of the most recognisable voices challenging the excesses of the War on Terror. He's written, spoken, campaigned and travelled the world advocating for those still detained, still voiceless and still forgotten. In more recent events, Moazzam Begg was charged for holding a peaceful demonstration, holding a banner with I Stand With Palestine Action, a group that the UK government has controversially designated as a proscribed terror organisation. Today we explore his journey, his reflections and his lessons that he believes the world must not ignore. Moazzam, welcome to the programme.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, just tell us a bit about that background in Birmingham, because it seems so far from so much of what's happened in the rest of your life.
I'm a child of the 70s, so all of what happened in regard to communities that had come from abroad and dealing with identity crises. Are you British? Are you Asian? Are you Pakistani? Are you Indian? Because my parents were born in India. Do you fit in? Do you belong? And that was tested to its limit, I would say. For me as a child, being beaten up by neo-Nazis, fighting them back, being part of a street gang that was made up of young Pakistanis, black people, and interestingly, Irish, because they were the kind of quote-unquote terrorist extremist community back then, not us. We were just the darkies, as it were. And in that, if that wasn't confusing enough, my father sent me to a Jewish school, so I was friends with, or my best friends were all Jews in Birmingham. And that wasn't a point of conflict at that time. Of course, later on, in many, many years later, I married a Palestinian and started to understand exactly what the sort of connections of where my friends from school would go to and inhabit possibly the home of my wife's family. But as a young child, none of that comes into your head, and you just have to deal with what's in front of you. And what was in front of me was, as I said, trying to find out where do I belong. And eventually I did find out where I belong, and I felt belonging in my faith identity as opposed to my geographical identity.
So that was a fascinating time. I mean, I lived in Birmingham slightly later than that, during the miners' strike in the mid-'80s in Handsworth. And as you say, Handsworth, everybody thinks it's an Afro-Caribbean community, or they think it's an Asian community. There were a lot of Irish in Handsworth at the same time, and the presence of the far right was very, very powerfully present. I mean, I remember them driving a car into the front of the left-wing bookshop in Birmingham with a body in the boot. So, I mean, how did you deal with that? You say you were part of a gang. How did that all happen?
Yeah, so the gang was actually called the Lynx, and it was named after this kind of, this cat that, we were told it doesn't mess with anybody, but doesn't let anybody mess with it, right? And that was a sort of a street cred. And also, there was a film back at that time called The Warriors, which I'm sure you must have come across. It was a cult classic. And
Walter Hill movie.
And we'd wear our colours. We literally had our own colours that we'd wear to kind of identify who we were. And it was a thing of the times, but our raison d'etre was to defend ourselves. I mean, everybody's experience at that time in that area was having some kind of interaction with the far right, with neo-Nazis, with the British movement, with the National Front, some of which are not around today, but some, clearly those ideas have kind of more honed in as they were. Now you would say it's more about Islamophobia. Back then, it wasn't. Nobody spoke about faith. It wasn't an issue. It was just being different. And as I said, I can't stress enough, it was seeing the Irish being targeted, though they were white, kind of gave us an understanding that this isn't just about colour. There are other undertones to this, and later on we'd understand about the whole connection with the Irish. And I didn't have an understanding of politics either, left wing or right wings. I was just young, and we just wanted to defend ourselves and stop getting beaten up. And we tried, and I did get beaten up several times. Steel-toe cap boots in my face, and choking on my own blood as a result of being beaten up. So, and we also fought back. I did hit back as well, and it was part of growing up in the 70s.
No, indeed, because I mean, and of course, I mean, the first demonstration I ever went on was the Battle of Lewisham, which was the confrontation with the National Front trying to march through that area. And for a time, I lived in Stratford in East London, and possible for me, not possible for you. If you travelled on the tube east of Liverpool Street, if you were wearing a badge, you took it off because you were going to get hit by somebody on the tube. And there were confrontations between socialists and the National Front every single weekend in Stratford Shopping Centre at that time. And the kind of experiences you had, of course, also happened.
Yeah, and it's interesting, because obviously when you're around that age and with the lack of social media, and you only know local issues. And so I didn't know what was happening in Bradford. I didn't know what was happening in Brick Lane and so forth in the areas you're talking about, Stratford. We'd assumed that our experience was just as this is just how things are. And in later years, I started to understand and listen to other people who told us a completely mirrored experience. It could have happened to them. They could be speaking about Birmingham and Sparkhill, and the dividing line would be Hay Mills. After you get to Hay Mills and to Acox Green areas, you're in enemy territory. You're in bandit country, as it were. So yeah, it's telling of the times.
And interesting what you say about the Jewish community at that time, because of course the Jewish community was very, very much aligned with the anti-fascist movement at that time for completely understandable historical reasons. It's a relatively recent development that the far right and the Zionist movement have got together. At that time, that would have been
unthinkable.
Yeah, nobody would have thought that.
No, absolutely correct. And again, to say, I went to two schools. My primary school was a Jewish school, the King David School, and I can say as one of maybe one or two in my class who were non-white, non-Jews, I never experienced a day of racism. And I look back with wonderful memories. It was when I went to my secondary school that I experienced it, and that wasn't a Jewish school. I've got involved in several fights and was beaten up, and saw many people beaten up as a result of that racism. But it didn't exist in the Jewish school. And we learned in that school about so many principles that I think hold on to this day. And as time went on, of course, you started to learn, but it wasn't, as you said correctly, they were seen to be and always seen to stand on our side, as it were. And
I think what's one of the interesting things about the Palestinian movement, that in opposition to the positioning of the Zionists, there's been almost a rebirth of that very long radical Jewish tradition. I mean, it's embattled in that community now, but it certainly reasserted itself amongst a minority of Jews who I imagine would have, absolutely understood, that description of their community that you've given.
I mean, I'd see things in the school sometimes, and we'd wave on our caps and on our school blazers. We had the Magen David, the Star of David, and we'd wave the Israeli flag around, and I'd see no contradiction in that. And my Islamic belief, for example, I'd study from the Torah in the day and from the Quran at night. But of course, things did eventually change, and of course, I had the lack of knowledge of a child, the innocence of a child. I did see the word Zion and Zionism in the school on posters sometimes. I didn't understand what that was. Not to say that everybody was that was being proposed as an ideology. It wasn't. But there's certainly undertones, and I know several of my then friends went on to move to Israel, to move on to live in the occupied territory, and no doubt join, perhaps as officers, the IDF.
So after that experience, how did you kind of, everybody I think, experiences a sort of partial formation at that age and then goes on and their life begins, they reflect on that and begin to change. What happened to you after that period?
There was two particular things in my late teens. One was that there's a friend of mine, he passed away, and he was really close to me, and I started to ask questions. I'm about 19 years old, about the soul's journey after death, and is there a life, etc., after death. And I started to get connected more to my spiritual side of the faith. But then there was also the political side, and that was, I had considered very, very earnestly to join the British Army. And that wasn't because for any other reason other than that my generations, we have a family tree that goes back 300 years, that we're all soldiers, right into the army of the Mughals in India. And then at some point, they became part of serving members of the British military in India, and as my grandfather was. So I thought about that, and I'd gone to the Army Careers Office and I'd taken some tests, but I couldn't because I had a court case pending in which I'd had a fight with some of the neo-Nazis. And I won that case. The case was thrown out of court, but they did try to charge me with a kind of an assault. It was the first time I had an experience ever after I had been beaten up. I had been arrested by about 10 neo-Nazis, and I was the one that was arrested. And that was fortuitous because the Gulf War started in and around that time. And I had to ask myself some really important fundamental questions. You may want to be part of a military tradition, but are you prepared to join a military that is invading a country that has some kind of religious connection to what you're now building yourself? Because I was starting to rediscover my Islamic identity, and that completely put me off. And the other thing was that I heard several stories of racism and racist deaths in the British military, and it wasn't for me.
So what did you do instead?
So there were several different things. I started to work for my father. My father used to be an estate. He was a banker before that and an estate agent. So I worked for him for a while. The war in Bosnia began, and I had taken over aid convoys. I'd met some of the Bosnian refugees. Again, no understanding that there's such a thing as white indigenous Muslims in the heart of Europe, which helped me to connect to something I always wanted to. I always felt, Islam, we're learning Islam, but it's not, Islam isn't South Asian, as much as my South Asian community want you to believe that it's exclusively theirs. It's far wider, and it helped me to kind of connect to that. And I became more connected to that part of my faith about being sort of transnational, and took over several aid convoys. And during one period of time, I joined the foreign volunteer force of the Bosnians, defending themselves, and they're people who come from all over the different Muslim world especially, for a short period of time.
And how did that experience sort of shape you?
Well, on the one side, I was seeing that there were massive United Nations forces there. They were present all over the place, Pakistanis and Bangladeshis and Turks and Malaysians and Brits. And on the one hand, they were there physically armed. On the other hand, the genocide was taking place and people were being killed en masse, and the Bosnians didn't have the kind of defense systems everybody else had that were attacking them. And so and when, of course, we heard about the genocide, it was, you think to yourself that you've got all of this Muslim world. They could have done something, could have intervened, they could have said something, done something. They did say something. I think there was an organization of Islamic conference made some kind of statement about there will be consequences if there's no withdrawal from this point. But really nothing happened, and that's one of the reasons why I kind of joined the Foreign Volunteer Force, because nobody's doing anything. So it did. It was had a profound effect on me. I saw people who been gang raped. I visited and took part in burials of several people. I remember going into different Bosnian cities, Mostar and Jebelnica and Tuzla and beyond, where you'd find every wall of every home, of every mosque and every church blown to bits or with bullet holes in them. So it was a profound effect on me, sure.
And so after that, did that change where you thought your life was going, that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it had me more connected to my faith. I was a lot more conscious of who I felt I was. That, yeah, I'm British by geography, but I'm Muslim by design, by choice. And it was around that time I got married. My wife, as I said, at that time was a Palestinian. And in 2001, I went with my wife and my kids at that time, I had 3, to Afghanistan. So it was a project that had begun to build schools and wells in Afghanistan, which was impoverished at that time. And it was proposed to me.
Why did you choose Afghanistan at that? I mean, some might say
Yeah,
that was bad luck, or
no. It wasn't. I was very conscious of where I chose, and it was because Afghanistan had gone through. So it was, in the sense, they fought the Soviet Union. They'd come out on top with mass amount of sacrifice, of course, and death, but it was this place where there was opportunity to bring education, from my point of view, from a Muslim point of view. So the Taliban were in power at the time. They weren't allowing female education. Of course, there's a big conversation about that even now. But they did allow us to open schools, and we did open schools, including for girls. We even had set up the curriculum, had buses, pick up kids from schools and drop them off.
And why do you think you were able to do that?
As a British Muslim, they weren't hostile. As a Muslim, they weren't hostile to us. They were hostile to non-Muslims. They were even hostile at that time to the United Nations and other organizations who they felt were not conducive to the good of their people. But they weren't hostile to us.
So because it was an initiative that came from within rather than being imposed from without.
Exactly. And we were able to create curriculums, bring in playground equipment, bring in other equipment, computers and so forth, with their knowledge. And I won't say mass approval, but there was no disapproval from them.
And so that's a period. It's immediately running up to the war on terror, to the attack on the Twin Towers. Did you have any premonition that something as big as that, I mean, that changed the whole direction of world history? Did you have a feeling that there was sometimes people do?
You know, John, if I'd said that, if they'd asked me that question in Guantanamo and I'd said yes, I'd still be there.
It's a more relaxed atmosphere here, though.
No, the short answer is no, not at all, because who could have known?
Yeah.
I think there are people to this day, I mean, we'll speak about Abu Zubaydah later, who you would have thought may have known something. He had no idea.
Yeah.
But the truth is that
I didn't mean in a sort of intelligence sense. I meant more in a sense that
is anything big, something more may happen. Yeah, there is. I thought, because at that time, 95% of the country was under the hands of the Taliban. There was only 5% up in the north that was in the hands of Ahmed Shah Massoud, the Northern Alliance, etc., etc. So yeah, I thought, that's it. They have control of the country, so it will be peaceful. And before I went, I did as much as I could at that time. You know, it had to be all done through phone calls and through lines that often get cut. Try to understand the situation there. And I was told repeatedly that it's safe. It's just up in the northern areas during the where the front lines are, that there's some hostility, but that's between soldiers, not in the cities. There's nothing happening in the cities.
So everybody says they remember where they were when the Twin Towers were hit. Where were you, and what was your initial reaction to that?
I was in my house. I shared a house. We had a huge 3-story house. So there was my friend Shakar Amar who lived on the first floor, and I lived on the ground floor. He came banging on the door frantically. America's been attacked, he shouted. Now, we didn't have televisions. The Taliban didn't allow televisions. But we did have the Voice of America, BBC World Service, and beyond on the radio. And so we'd heard all of this, and frantically. I had no concept. I've never been to America at all. So I can honestly say I had no idea what the Twin Towers were. I know what the Pentagon is, know what the White House was, but not the Twin Towers. And when he said America has been attacked, I kind of thought maybe it's China, maybe it's, I don't know, North Korea, maybe Cuba even. But it didn't compute at all. I learned, of course, maybe later that day or the next day, whenever it was, that the accusation was that bin Laden was behind it. Now, bin Laden wasn't in Kabul. He was in Kandahar, which is about a 24-hour drive away from where we were. But nonetheless, you could feel there's going to be some kind of reaction.
Yeah. And so how did events fold out? What happened between that moment and you being seized?
So as I recall, I may get this wrong, we thought that they would attack bin Laden because they were putting out and saying, but again, bin Laden's based in Kandahar, so that's far away from us, and Kabul's the main, the city, the capital. But I remember the first nights when cruise missiles landed, and they were on a hill just in front of us. I visited that hill recently, actually. And that there were some Taliban anti-aircraft positions there. So at first they were bombing at night, maybe afraid of anti-aircraft. But I think they didn't have much anti-aircraft capabilities. So then they started to bomb in the day. Now, most of the places they hit were outside, but they did hit places within the city, and you could feel. In fact, there was one bomb I remember that landed in our area, and you heard this. It's almost, I would say, like a sound that it's a nice sound, and that is of windows smashing simultaneously. But it's also very horrific because the earth literally shook underneath your feet. I took myself, my kids, my wife, next door neighbors, and we had a big underground basement area, and just hid there.
Moazzam, you were saying that we just left that conversation where you were hiding in the basement because of the US attacks.
An interesting thing happened 2 days before 9/11, and I did see something happen then, and that was on the 9th of September. Ahmed Shah Massoud, who was the leader of the North Alliance, had been killed, allegedly. I mean, later found out it was Al-Qaeda. And it was the first time I ever saw an attack on Kabul, where helicopters flew, Northern Alliance helicopters flew, and they struck some Taliban positions. From that point onwards, even after 9/11, nothing happened for around 4 weeks, I think, maybe longer than that, around a month. So we remained cautiously optimistic that there would be no attack. And of course, we were wrong. The Tomahawk started, and then after that, I evacuated with the family, as many others. Some people still felt that it's just going to be bombing and nothing more than that. Nobody, I won't say nobody, but nobody really was contemplating a full occupation. And of course, that is what happened.
Yeah. So you evacuated from Afghanistan to...
So yeah, it took a period, there were different junctures, as it were. It took a period of several weeks. I went to an area called Logar, which is about an hour or so away from it's out in the sort of towards the border of Pakistan. And so long story short, there was a period of time where I got cut off from my family because I'm trying to go back to my home to pick up things from the house. I was unable to get back because then Kabul had fallen. So I had to take a route that took us over the mountains. And everybody's being chased. So anybody that's especially a foreigner, the bounties there being offered for foreigners. and it's chaos. I don't know where my family is. I don't know if they're alive or dead. There's no communications, no mobile phones. And so for a period of time, I had no idea where my family were. And eventually I got over to Pakistan, got reunited with them. Took up residence in Pakistan. My parents are originally from Pakistan, so I have friends and relatives there. And I remain helping others, helping other refugees, people evacuating from the war. And it was kind of almost... A friend of mine calls me from the UK, said, MI5 agents have come and they're asking about you. And I said, okay, give them my number. I'm happy to speak to them if they want to speak. About 3 days later, there's a knock on my door. It's at midnight, 31st of January, 2002. I open the door, my wife and kids are asleep, and there's a group of people out there, nobody in uniform at all. Somebody pulls out a gun, the guy in front, he puts it straight to my head, pushes me into the forecourt of the house. The other guys come with him. One's got a stun gun crackling in the background. It all happens so suddenly, I don't have a chance to think of what am I going to do and who are these people. No words are said. My hands are shackled behind my back with these kind of, they call them...
cable ties.
Cable ties, yeah. And my legs. And they put a hood over my head, and before the hood's put on, I see them going into the house where my kids are and family are. I say, please don't go in there. I don't get it. I don't see them again now for the next 3 years. They take me into the back of this vehicle, and in the vehicle, it's the first time I know that this isn't Pakistanis doing this. So in the vehicle, they lift the hood off, and I see two guys sitting in the front. They're dressed like Pakistanis, but it's very clear they're not. And they're two white Caucasian guys, and they start speaking in English with American accents. And one of them says, you can either answer our questions here or answer them in Guantanamo. And one of them pulls out a pair of handcuffs, and he says, these cuffs were given to me by my friend's wife, who was killed in one of the Twin Towers. And despite all the fear I had at that moment, you know, because he wanted to cut, he cuffed my hands with that, even though they were cable tied. I said, wouldn't she think you're stupid for capturing the wrong guy? And that was it. That was the beginning of my sort of journey in US custody of sorts.
So, do you know to this day why it is that they picked you up?
Yeah, I think so. So in 1998, there's a friend of mine, is a Moroccan, who was traveling to the Emirates. And in Dubai, he was detained, beaten, tortured, and interrogated. And he said that he was interrogated there by British MI5 agents. And he's talking about 98 now. And he managed to smuggle a letter to me out. Please, can you help me? Because I've been tortured here. There are British agents present. That's the first time I approached Gareth Pearce, who later became my own lawyer and friend, and friend of all people that have been oppressed, to talk about his case. Can we find a lawyer for this guy? Because he says he's being tortured. And so when MI5 came to my house, they came to my house in 1998, that same year, early in the morning. And there was a particular agent, he called himself Andrew. I don't know what his real name is. And he starts to talk to me in my house. He sits down, offer him a cup of tea. And about the case of this man. And then this man afterwards is sent to Morocco, and he has a whole ordeal that lasts for over 2 decades after that, in which the British are completely involved. But then when I'm taken now in 2002, eventually to Kandahar, Bagram, and Guantanamo, who turns up? So when I'm in this tent in the middle of, or next in Kandahar, next to the airport that's been taken over by the Americans, and it's a military base. Imagine I'm taken from the military cell, from the holding cell. My hands are behind my back, shackled. My legs are shackled. I've got a hood over my head. I've got 2 guards pushing me down into the bowing position. I come into this tent, and I'm put on my knees, and soldiers are pointing guns towards me. They lift the hood up. Who do I see in front of me? Andrew. Yeah. And the same Andrew who 3 years ago had been sitting in my front room, who I offered tea to. So that's how I know who did it. I know completely who and why. And what may have triggered it, I mean, I know that there were bounties offered, bounties of money for foreigners. That may have been the general thing, but this was the specific.
So, okay, and so now tell us in sequence what happened to you after that detention.
After that point at which I get taken, I'm held in a Pakistani detention site stroke ISI secret police site. They keep me relatively well compared to other prisoners. I know this because I'm in a room, and when I ask to go to the bathroom, they take me to the cells, and the cells look something out of a medieval torture center. Mostly Arab prisoners there. It is horrifying. People are being beaten, tortured. I hear their screams. I see them being beaten. I see the torture, and it is shocking. But they didn't do a thing to me. In fact, they said, we know, they'd use the term of endearment, beta, which in Urdu means son. We know you've not done anything wrong. You're not wanted. We know you're a family man. It's the Americans. The Americans are doing this, and if we don't do this, they will strike us so hard we will not be able to stand up. And like that, after about a couple of... so in that period of time, I'm interrogated by not just the FBI, by British intelligence. The same intelligence officers who had visited my friend, who I told him to give my phone number to. And I said, well, you could have called me instead of just taking me in this way. And, and they say to me that the only way we can help you is if you cooperate with the Americans. I said, but I'm not American, I'm British. And that was it.
Yeah.
And then I am put on this plane that sends me back into Afghanistan to Kandahar. And when I'm taken off the plane with other prisoners, we're stripped naked, beaten, spat upon. My clothes are sliced off with a knife. Dogs barking, literally salivating over us. They're that close. Floodlights around. Photographs being taken, trophy pictures. Hair shaved, beard shaved. Being laughed at and mocked, and then put into the infamous jumpsuits, and then put into this barn that's been converted into holding cells, and the doors are made of razor wire. It's just all razor wire. The doors, the walls, and everything are just razor wire.
So how long was that process before you ended up in Guantanamo itself?
So it was close, I would say about a year. So I'm in Kandahar, then I'm in another place called Bagram, which is the infamous Bagram detention facility that Donald Trump has asked for. He's asked for the whole base. Right?
Yes.
So I'm there in Bagram for about a year in total. And I would say Bagram is far worse than Guantanamo because it's this makeshift place where the rules are as they make up. They're creating as they go along, and because they're in a quote-unquote war zone, they feel more justified in the abuses. And I saw 2 prisoners murdered there by the Americans, one with his hand tied above his head to the top of the cage, being punched and kicked repeatedly. And the Americans have all accepted this. Everything I've said now, the Americans have accepted, wide and beyond. So by the time I get to Guantanamo, I'm looking forward to it, in all honesty. I'm saying that what can be worse than this? But of course, there are things worse than this that I did learn of about the secret detention sites that even I didn't go to, but people like Abu Zubaydah did. So it's all perspective. I end up in Guantanamo for about 2 years in solitary confinement. I don't get to see another soul until the last few months when I'm put on the blocks and held with other prisoners, including one of Osama bin Laden's drivers, one of his cooks, another British guy, and an Australian.
And so, I mean, it's obviously an absolutely horrific experience. How do you sustain yourself through something like that?
I mean, there are several different things. At various times, as somebody who was connected to my faith was extremely important to me. I started to memorize different parts of the Quran. The largest chapter in the Quran, the cow with Baqarah, I memorized in Bagram, despite the fact that they were desecrating the Quran. They were ripping it up. They were spitting upon it. They were drop kicking it to us, and many other things. But that was an extremely important part, to contemplate, to read, to help to, that space that you get. You wouldn't wish it upon anybody, but you do. When in solitary and alone, you can actually formulate things if you're able to categorize and compartmentalize things and break up your day. And as a Muslim, I had 5 different points in the day that I could break it up. It was hard, it was difficult, there's no doubt about that. It was so that was one part of it. The other part was the soldiers. There were a lot of good, decent soldiers there, which you wouldn't really, when you talk about you wouldn't expect it, them and us sort of situation, but there were. And some of them have remained my friends to this day. Some became Muslims, others didn't, but some have joined me on tours in the UK speaking about and against Guantanamo. And I would say they've become lifelong friends, which you would never expect. I play games of chess, not in the cell, but the board is outside, and I'm telling the soldier, "Can you move my, my pieces in this way and that way?" We'd have conversations about religion, politics, history, marital advice sometimes, and it's because you're in that confined, closed space that you can have that conversation and link. The moment I was put on the blocks, as it were, with the other in general population, as they call it, you can't really do that because there it really is a them and us. And you're seeing other prisoners getting abused, sometimes beaten up, tortured, sprayed, pepper sprayed in the face. And so you can't make that kind of relationship. So it was, again, wouldn't wish it on anyone, but I take so much away from it that I wouldn't wish it away.
Were you frightened?
In the early days, yes, definitely, most definitely.
And how did you overcome that? Or do you just have to live through it?
I think it depends where you are. When you're in solitary confinement, and I was at different points in solitary confinement, especially in Bagram. I spent a month there in solitary confinement where I heard the sounds of a woman screaming. They led me to believe it was my wife being tortured next door. As I said, I saw prisoners beaten to death. I'd have my hands tied behind my back to my legs, sort of hog-tied as they call it, and be suspended there. They told me that if you don't cooperate, we're going to send you to Egypt or to Syria. And I know that they did send people to Egypt and to Syria. And as bad as the Americans were, I know that what could happen in those places were far, far worse. So, yes, it was. It wasn't, for the Americans, they call it the war on terror. For me, it was a war of terror. They terrorized, and that was the intention, to terrorize. But there's a point at which you come when you're no longer afraid. And I did reach that point, mostly in Guantanamo. So any threats and you're going to be here forever, and I say to them at some points, actually, I quite like it here. So carry on. There's a point in which you break through that barrier.
And how did your release happen?
Well, you must know, I'm sure you know Clive Stafford Smith.
Yes.
So Clive Stafford Smith was introduced to me by way of letter, I think through Gareth. And letters, they were heavily censored, so you wouldn't know what is coming and when and how. And sometimes I get letters through the Red Cross written by my 7-year-old daughter, which were heavily redacted, meaning everything's blacked out except, in the name of Allah and I love you, Dad. Everything else is blacked out. But legal letters did start getting some kind of a protection. And so Clive was introduced to me by Gareth, and she said, and in the letter it says, there's a lawyer who's been working on death row for the past 20-odd years, and you're in good hands. And I thought, oh my God, I'm screwed. A death row lawyer. Why do I need one of those? And there was conversation, of course, there, which did reach the British Parliament, that anybody that's designated for trial by military commission could face execution. And that's what they used to say. The FBI used to say to me, oh, if you don't do this, if you don't do that, you could get executed. So for what? But eventually, Clive was given access. He did come. And it wasn't to challenge a court hearing that I had. It was to say, this guy should be released. He's not charged or trialed. And so he told me that you will be released in days coming. And that's what happened. Over the next week or so, I was told, you're going home. There's no charges against you. They put me on this coach. And it takes about an hour to get from the prison cell to the airport. They black out all the windows. There's 40 soldiers for 4 British citizens, 10 for each of us. And I remember saying to the other guys who I'd never seen before, these idiots think we're going to escape on our way to freedom because we're all shackled up. We arrive at the airport and they forget the keys for the shackles, so they have to snap them off with wire cutters. I get onto the British transport plane and there's police officers there, right? bobbies.
Yeah.
And I'm also kind of happy to see them. And they bring us newspapers. The Sun. I'm on the front page of the Sun. It's torture in itself.
Yeah, exactly. It seems harsh
Yeah,
when you
it
come
seems
out of
like it, yeah.
Guantanamo
Yeah, the
to be
first
given
thing
a
you see,
copy
right?
of the Sun.
Yeah. But they did bring some, other chocolates and crisps and stuff, and no shackles,
Yeah.
no handcuffs.
Yeah.
I get arrested as soon as we land at RF Northallerton, and then they take me to Paddington Green Police Station. They hold me there for the night, and then the next day, I go to Gareth Pearce's house where my wife and kids and my father are all waiting.
Okay, look, it's an incredible story, of course, but just tell us a little bit about your book, Enemy Combatant, where you've reflected on this. Was it cathartic writing the book?
I'd begun in Guantanamo.
Yeah.
I'd begun in my mind, at least. I'd even written some skeleton notes, and I destroyed them because I didn't want them to get my thoughts before I left. And I was conversing. In fact, it was one of the former prisoners there who suggested the name of the prisoners there, because that's the title they gave us. And so it wasn't just cathartic. It was also, I think, informative. I needed to tell people, and I really had certain people in mind when I wrote it. I had the American soldiers, the military community in mind. I wanted them to understand this is what you're doing and who you've done it to. And I did write a different version ending for the American publication. And I also wanted people here to understand who I was and what I was about. And it took me on the whole circuit right across, to the Hay on Wye Book Festival, the Edinburgh Book Festivals, and beyond. And so it was a new experience, an important experience, and I would say cathartic as well.
So you continued the political activism. I mean, some people might quite legitimately and very reasonably have decided, I've had enough, I'd like to I enjoy a quiet life, but you haven't. I mean, perhaps more of a political life now than before. How does that feel? Because it's got you to bump up against the security system a couple of times since then, hasn't it? Does that feel dangerous and uncomfortable?
No, because I've faced, I think, the worst of what they could do. Right? I mean, they could do worse if they wanted to, but really, I have to say this, that they radicalized me. It wasn't Abu Hamza, it wasn't Abu Qatada, it wasn't Bin Laden, or it was the security services. They radicalized me to do what I want to do, that I do now. And I actually used to say that before. I said, I have to thank the FBI and the CIA and MI5 and everybody else. They gave me the confidence. I used to be a shaking leaf sometimes in interrogations, but you have to get through those type of things. And it just can, as the old adage, it makes you or breaks you. I'm genuinely not afraid of them. I'm concerned if there's something wrong, like anybody else, but people say they're watching you. I say, right, I'm looking right back at them. And we do hold them to account. That's been part of the process, is that taking MI5 to court, giving reports. I mean, Dominic Grieve recently just now spoke about Abu Zubaydah. I mean, we gave him evidence of the British government's role in torture before 9/11. And the case of the friend I spoke about who was questioned in Dubai. So holding a mirror up to the security services, maybe a lot of people don't want to do that. But we say to them, it's really important that we do. And in it, we've gained many allies and supporters and friends and that we wouldn't have necessarily had before.
Do you feel, I mean, I've known a lot of political activists over the years, and political activists, like everybody else, come in different shapes and forms, and some people you feel are kind of edgy and disconcerted about the political situation and even about their place in it. You don't strike me like one of those people. You strike me like the kind of political activists who are actually, perhaps this is the wrong kind of wording, but happy and content with what they're doing. They feel that they know their place and what they're attempting to do. Is that how you feel?
I think so. I think I even use the word, I'm comfortable where I am, in the sense that I'm not on edge constantly, because I've seen what happens when you're on edge all the time. And I was a person that used to be on edge. I mean, when I travel, I can tell you almost every time that I come back into the UK, I'm stopped. And for those who know, the stop could be a short stop for 5-10 minutes, but it could be 5 or 6 hours. It depends. You just don't know. By the same token, I have gone back to Bagram, the very same prison where I used to be held in. And the former prisoners who were held with me in Bagram now are running the country. And we've made films. I've made a film with Al Jazeera about the echoes of Bagram and returning to the place. So to me, it's returning to the scene of a crime, scene of murder and torture and false imprisonment. So there are things happening that, in the great scheme of things, we as Muslims call it predestination or whatever it is, but nobody could have imagined it. So just as, to me, it balances off. You're seeing things happening that kind of counterbalance the risk, as it were, of getting on a plane in the first place for somebody like me.
Final question, I guess. Do you think that the situation in America now is the kind of Guantanamo regime coming home to roost? Because the detention centres, the ICE raids, the events that we've seen in Minneapolis in the last few days, it all rather looks as if something which was kind of exported to Bagram and Guantanamo is now, some people even talking about kind of an imminent civil war in America, perhaps.
Yeah.
Luckily, we're not there yet, but it's beginning to feel like that. Do you think?
When you used to think of police in America, right? You used to think, FBI, the good guys, Starsky and Hutch, and all that sort of stuff, and how different it is. So, the police in the United States of America are militarized. They're like soldiers walking on the streets, and it is like it's a Guantanamoization. You did this to the rest of the world, and now it's coming to you. In fact, you saw recently what happened with Maduro. It's believed that when he was taken, he was stopped at Guantanamo before he was taken to America. And of course, there's America's form in this. They did it to Noriega before in the past. So it wasn't that just rendition was only happened after 9/11. They were doing it before to other people. But in America in and of itself, there's no doubt that, I often say that if you look historically speaking, the last time the United States took people over from Africa and beyond in chains to the Americas was slavery. The second time was us, in chains to the Americas. But it's coming home to roost now, because a lot of that behavior, techniques, and so forth, they were developed in the United States. We thought they were only developed for us, but they were doing some of these things to their own people. We had the shackles that we were wearing. They were made by Hyatts. And I remember when Clive Stafford Smith came along, and I said to him, what you, I, and these shackles have in common? We were all made in England. And Hyatts used to make those N-word collars for escaped slaves back during slavery. So a lot of this stuff is coming home to roost, and I think you can see that with what's happened recently in Minneapolis. The fact that it isn't a black person that was shot, it was a white mother, middle-class mother. What did you expect? What did you think was going to happen with this kind of racism towards other people? You think it's not going to come back to you? Of course it will, and that's what's happening.
Well, Moazzam Begg, that was absolutely fascinating, but I'm afraid we have to stop there. But if you want to know more, please do have a look at Moazzam's book, Enemy Combatant. But for now, thanks very much for watching. Thanks to Moazzam for being here. That's at the end of this edition of In Conversation.